We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, Special Prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have a very hard-hitting show. It's a sad period of time in the history of our country. You might remember H.G. Wells's movie and audio presentation on the radio many, many years ago, if you're old enough. If not, you've read about it, War of the Worlds. Well, this was dealing with Martians who had invaded the entire globe, trying to take it over. And in fact, what we are faced now with is war of the left. They are trying to take over our nation. They are trying to co-opt it and, in fact, install, I believe, what in effect would be a socialist dictatorship. And how do they do that? They do that in various forms. And we've seen that particularly this week with regard to the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. And we've seen it in other instances, too. And I'm going to discuss that during the show. And then we're going to get the views of our very good patriot and friend, Bob Barr, who's going to join us during the third segment to give us his take on it. He's former U.S. attorney from the Northern District of Georgia, former congressman. I worked with Congressman Barr in having President Bill Clinton impeached. You, of course, know that I'm the only lawyer ever to have a court rule that Slick Willie committed a crime. I'm the founder of Judicial Watch. I ran for the U.S. Senate. I'm now running Freedom Watch, which I also founded. But let's talk about this entire Cavanaugh fiasco. As you may know, I'm not a fan of Judge Kavanaugh. He's a member of the Washington elite Republican establishment. He went to prep schools like Georgetown Preparatory. He later, because it's a feeder school, got into Yale undergraduate, Yale Law School. I'm not saying he didn't do his academics and didn't do well, but those are the schools that get you into these very fashionable Ivy League schools. He comes from a family in suburban Maryland, quite wealthy, country club set. His mother's a judge as well. He's been shielded from the world for most of his career and most of his youth. He's lived a privileged life, and he's never experienced adversity, but he's experiencing it now with the vicious attacks of the leftist Democrats, shored up by radical feminists, atheists, pro-Islamic groups, pro-black groups that are radical, all radical. I'm not against people that aren't radical, and others. Okay, this is part of a takeover largely financed by George Soros, the self-hating Jew, who, along with his father, confiscated property from their fellow Jews during World War II as they were going to the gas chambers. These are the people that we're up against, and we saw the viciousness just this week. And although Judge Kavanaugh would not have been my choice to be Supreme Court Justice to replace Justice Anthony Kennedy, I had issues with Kavanaugh because he nullified lower court rulings in a case styled Klayman versus Obama. You know about that. I've talked about it. That ordered the stop to unconstitutional mass surveillance against the American people without probable cause. He didn't need to do that, but we found out during the confirmation hearings why he did it. He did it because when he was a staff secretary in the George W. Bush White House, he was one of the parties that helped craft this illegal and unconstitutional program, which violates the Fourth Amendment. I didn't see how I could vote for anybody who didn't respect the Fourth Amendment and rights to privacy of the American people. But I'll tell you something. When I saw how he was being attacked and smeared, as many men in this country are today, regrettably, men and women should be treated equally. Men and women should have the same rights. There are, in fact, legitimate elements of the so-called Me Too movement, but most of that movement are fueled by a radical feminist and leftist bent to use charges of sexual misbehavior and racism to help further their goal of taking over this country and installing their leaders and installing their judges and installing their vigilantes, for that matter, like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, to run the country. It's barbarian. So that created sympathy toward Judge Kavanaugh. And also the games that were played by Senator Dianne Feinstein, ranking member, and her ilk on the Senate Judiciary Committee by withholding the name of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, who had alleged, perhaps with some credibility, that she had been sexually assaulted attempted rape. Now let's put it in context. I tended to believe her yesterday, but on the other side of the coin was this attack against Judge Kavanaugh. He had to stand up for himself, and I take my hat off to Lindsey Graham and others who came in on the Republican side after the prosecutor they put in there, this individual, Miss Mitchell from Maricopa County, Arizona, proved to be totally worthless and hapless. I mean, it was like Dr. Strangelove. She forgot that she was there to defend a Kavanaugh, or to at least question in a way that would get some compelling truth out, some compelling evidence. It was like she was representing the victim, as she usually does in a prosecution. It was like she was doing a Sig Heil to Adolf Hitler, not knowing that, in fact, she was in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I'm happy with the pushback yesterday, but I do believe that Christine Blasey Ford, the victim, I believe that she believes that she was sexually assaulted and that there was an attempted rape. But let's go back and look at the situation. There's no question that Kavanaugh even admitted that he had drunk heavily, in high school and in college. And this should be a lesson to everybody. Lay off the alcohol. Stay sober. If you have to drink alcohol to have a good time, there's something wrong with you. Same thing with marijuana or hard drugs like cocaine. Learn to enjoy life. Believe in God. Believe in yourself. You don't need these crutches. But yes, let's say that Kavanaugh did jump on her during a party when he was 17 years old, 36 years ago. And let's say that Kavanaugh, as seems to be the case, straightened himself out after college. And he's lived a good life after that. And in fact, has helped a lot of women and is a good father to his sons and teaches basketball and has brought women into as clerkships to his courts. If he made a mistake 36 years ago, should that deny him from being a Supreme Court justice? And I don't think that he attempted to rape Christine Blasey Ford. People, tend to see things that aren't there when they're victims. Maybe he jumped on top of her, okay, drunk. So let's move on at this point. There should have been an FBI investigation. This is what the FBI does. The Republicans were not being ingenuous. They weren't being sincere. They do background checks. When I applied to be a Justice Department lawyer and was offered a position in the antitrust division, they did a background check. They talked to all of my friends, associates, and contacts, and they gather information. Yes, they don't make a decision, but it's important to gather information. But now it's too late because the Democrats played games and they backed this nomination process into the corner. And if Kavanaugh does not get through now and is confirmed, for better or worse, and again, I believe that President Trump could have come up with a better pick, perhaps Amy Coney Barrett of the University of Notre Dame Law School, someone who actually is more ideologically akin to we conservatives. But at this point, we have to go with Kavanaugh, because if it doesn't get through now, and if, as expected, the Democrats take control of Congress, including the Senate, then a lame duck session is never going to be able to confirm any of President Trump's picks unless he waters down the picks to the point that he doesn't even have a conservative anymore. Plus, he's likely to be impeached if the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Perhaps he won't be convicted in the end because you need a 2/3 vote in the Senate, but it's going to grind everything to a halt. And the whole vision of making America great again will go down the drain. So this is what we're facing. And just this morning, Friday morning, Senator Flake, who said he was going to vote for Judge Kavanaugh, did a about face. Of course, we know that Senator Flake hates the President of the United States, Donald Trump. It's most likely that Flake, who thinks he's a good-looking guy, good dresser, I might add, but is really pompous and conceited. He'll probably run for president in 2020. So he threw a monkey wrench into this by saying, okay, we need an FBI investigation at this late date. I'm going to move Kavanaugh with a recommendation outside of the Judiciary Committee onto the floor of the Senate. And very disingenuous, very clever, very treacherous. It's really too late for an FBI investigation now if you want a conservative justice on the Supreme Court. So to some extent, we have to put principle aside, because what we'll get if we don't get Kavanaugh, with all of his problems with the Fourth Amendment, is someone much worse than Kavanaugh in the end that can be confirmed if the Democrats take control of Congress. So this is where we are today. But this is a case study in the war of the left against the rest of us, particularly conservatives, libertarians, and people in faith. We must win that war at all legal costs, peacefully and appropriately. We are losing our country. And this is why you need support Freedom Watch. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. freedomwatchusa.org. We are your Justice Department. You don't have an Attorney General in Jeff Sessions. There's no other public interest group, including my former one, Judicial Watch, that actually brings hard-hitting cases. And of course, we have citizens' grand juries on the horizon. We're going to discuss that in the next segment and what we've been doing. But we are your last hope. We are your Justice League. So go to freedomwatchusa.org. Sign up for our Justice League. Support our hard-hitting cases and citizens' grand juries. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. I'll be right back with the second segment, a Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman, because we are in a state of crisis and we must address it now.